Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite baits for winter bass fishing, and that is the Ned Rig. We're going to talk about 3 tips that you need to focus on to catch more fish this winter while using the Ned Rig, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. So the Ned Rig makes such an excellent bait for winter bass fishing because it is such a small profile. Most of these baits are no bigger than 2.5 inches long, and they're a perfect snack size meal for any bass you could potentially put this in front of. The other thing these do really well is fish very slowly on the bottom and mimic anything like a small bait fish, insect, or even crawfish crawling around down there on the bottom in the wintertime, and it's a perfect opportunity for a bass to come grab this. Most of the bass are going to be laying tight to the bottom this time of year anyway because the water is so cold. They'll either be holding close to structure or tight on the bottom, and if you can drag this in front of their face, you can get a bite on it because it's a small meal for them to grab. They will just grab it out of instinct. However, there are a couple key tips that I focus on with my Ned Rigs in the winter that'll help me catch some more fish, and we're going to go through those today. So we're going to start with talking about the rod and reel and line setup you should be fishing with your Ned Rig. Then we're going to talk about the actual jig head selection, which is pretty important. And lastly, and probably the most important one, is your bait selection. If you choose the right bait this time of year, you're going to catch a lot more fish. So at the end of this video, we're going to break it down to the few select baits that you need, play around with those options in your favorite colors, and you're going to be catching a ton of fish in no time on the Ned Rig. So let's start by talking about the rod and reel setup you need. So there's a couple key things that you need to pay attention to in your rod, reel, and line setup when you're fishing in the wintertime with these Ned Rigs. Because they are such small baits, they don't weigh a lot to begin with anyway, they're hard to feel to begin with, and on top of that, the bass are so cold that the bites are going to be very light and hard to detect. So if you set your rod and reel up properly, it'll give you the best chance to feel every bite and make sure you don't miss any fish while you're out there fishing. So let's start with the rod. What I use here, this is a Kistler KLX drop shot finesse worm spinning rod. Essentially, all you need to focus on in your spinning rod is you want a medium to medium light action. I like something with a little bit of backbone in my rod because this is a single hook bait. A lot of times if you have something that's a little too whippy, you might not be able to drive that hook point enough into the fish to get them hooked. But if you have something like this is a medium action, just that little bit stiffer backbone sometimes can get that hook point in a little bit deeper and make sure you don't lose as many fish. This is still a soft rod overall because it's a spinning rod, but it still has just enough backbone to get a better hook set than you would on a very soft medium light. So just play around with your rod action there. But the biggest key on a good Ned Rig rod in the winter is a fast or even an extra fast action tip. The faster the tip, the less of the rod is actually going to bend, which will transmit bites and other things down the rod to your handle a lot better. So you'll be able to feel every rock down there, or if a bass comes over and just kind of picks it up off the bottom, you'll be able to feel that instantly with a faster and extra fast action rod. The faster the tip, the more sensitive the rod's going to be. So that is something that I pay attention to in all of not only my Ned Rig rods, but my finesse rods as a whole. And then when it comes to a reel, I keep it pretty basic. The more important thing is going to be the line on here. You'll notice I don't have any because I'm up here in Pennsylvania where it's the winter, so I haven't been doing any fishing, but it's coming very soon. We're heading to Florida in 3 weeks, so if there's any type of fishing tip videos you'd like to see down there once we start fishing, go ahead and comment that down below. But essentially, your reel is just going to hold your line. So right here, I have a Kistler Series 1 spinning reel. This is a 2000 size. Anything in that 2000 to 3000 size is what you're looking for. The more important thing on your spinning reels typically is going to be how smooth the drag is, but also in the wintertime, these fish aren't going to make hard runs like they would typically if the water was a lot warmer. They move a lot slower. They just kind of tail kick and try and pull against the rod. So you still want a smooth drag. Don't ignore that fact. But if it's not the smoothest, you can still get away with that for the wintertime. Essentially though, on my finesse spinning reels, I like to get the smoothest drag I can, and something in that 2000 to 3000 size range, that's the perfect setup on these medium action or medium light action spinning rods. Then when it comes to my line selection, I got 2 things here. You can go straight fluorocarbon if you want to. This is what I would go with if I was going to do that. This is just Seagar in VizX 8-pound test. You can go straight 8-pound fluorocarbon, but if you want to land more fish and make sure you feel everything, I highly recommend going to braid, specifically this high vis green braid like this. Seagar makes that as well. It's called the Smackdown braid. A couple others I've tried is like the Power Pro yellow or the Suffix 832. Any of that stuff can work. The biggest keys in this bright line are twofold. One, you'll have extra sensitivity on the braid than you would over stretch and fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon doesn't have much stretch, but it has enough that it'll dull your sensitivity just enough, and in the wintertime that can be the difference between catching more fish and less fish. And also the high-vis braid, if a fish bites your bait, you can literally see your line jump when they suck it into their mouth, and that will key you that a fish actually bit it even if you don't feel the bite. Then you can feel the weight of the fish and set the hook on them, and you'll land more fish that way. And if you're worried about the fish seeing this bright green braid, I tie about a 6 to 12 foot leader of this 8-pound Seagar and Vizex on the end of my braid anyway, so I get the best of both worlds. I just use the 15-pound test lime green braid as my main line, tie the leader on, and then tie your Ned Rig on. The perfect setup to catch a ton of fish this winter. You'll feel every bite and the fish won't see your line. Let's talk about some jig head selection. This can be often overlooked as it's just a piece of lead on a hook and that makes the jig head, but there are a couple of key things that you want to pay attention to with your jig head that will catch you more fish. I pour my own jig heads. I have the mold for these, and if you want to see a video on how to do that, it saves a ton of money. Go ahead and leave a comment down below. But I will also talk about if you buy these in store, whichever way you want to go, the couple jig heads that you need. The biggest key with a Ned Rig is to make sure you fish the lightest jig head you can to maintain bottom contact. That will give it the most natural presentation. If you fish a 1/4 ounce jig head in 1 foot of water, it's just going to plummet down in there, and it's every time you pull it, it's going to get stuck, and then you'll pop it up off the bottom. It'll make it look unnatural. Where if you fish a lighter jig head, it kind of just glides along the bottom, and it makes it look way more natural to the fish. So I fish 2 sizes. I fish a 3/16 and a 1/8. Those are the sizes in my jig head mold. But if you're buying them in stores, the Z-Mans, I think this is about a 1/5 size. That's the most similar size. And then this one's most similar to about the 1/10 size. Or if they make the 1/8, that's a good one as well. Now I know Z-Man makes like 5 different size jig heads, and my mold alone has like 6 or 7 different sizes in it, and I pour all of them. But if you're just looking to keep it simple, you only need those 2 sizes, a 1/8 or a 1/10 and a 3/16 or like a 1/5. That is the most common sizes that I use out of my jig heads, and that is allowing me to maintain bottom contact in deeper water with the bigger one, and in shallower water I can make my bait look more natural by gliding over the bottom. If you want to buy more jig heads, I highly recommend buying every size they make and playing around with it. I have seen times where I've gone from a 1/10 to a 1/8 ounce jig head in just a little bit deeper water, and it'll catch me more fish because I can maintain bottom contact better. And complete reverse, if I'm fishing up in shallower water, going to a lighter jig head will get you more bites just because it's not burying itself down into the ground. Lastly, we're going to talk about your bait selection for your Ned Rig. This is very important as not all Ned Rig baits are created equal. There are a couple I like, and for the most part, I do use the Z-Man TRD. This is one of the best ones. Not only the stretchy portion, the fact that I can catch like 10, 20, 30 fish on one bait, but the fact that they float. That is the key to the Ned Rig. That is why it works so well. When you stop it on the bottom, it just stands up there and allows the fish to see this bait. It looks like a little minnow feeding on the bottom or a little bug down there or anything like that. That's why the Ned Rig does so well. When it comes to color selection on your TRDs, I keep it very simple on that as well. I either use green pumpkin or like green pumpkin goby or Canada cross, something that has a green pumpkin base, or green pumpkin with a little bit of glitter in it. Any of those work really, really well. That works great for clear water. Pretty much 90% of the time, this is the one that I'm going to throw. Just a straight green pumpkin. It catches a ton of fish and can mimic anything down there on the bottom. The next one that I use when the water is just a little bit stained or dirty and I need something that stands out a little bit better is going to be a black or a black and blue. I think they call their black yoga pants, but they work great. They stand out really well. They imitate a shadow on the bottom. They do an awesome job of mimicking anything down there as well. It could be a little bug, it could be a little minnow, it could be a little crawfish. Just the shadow of it works great, stands out, and allows the fish to come over and find this bait. And my favorite for when they're feeding on minnows, this one works awesome. It's called the Deal. It's like a half and half, kind of like a grayish green pumpkin on the back and a pearlish blue belly on the bottom. This thing mimics little minnows down there on the bottom. Amazing. Anytime you have fish feeding on minnows, shad, alewife, anything, any type of like silvery minnow like that, even emerald shiners up on Lake Erie. This is an awesome color to mimic that type of bait fish. And if you have fish feeding on craws, and especially when they're orange, if you've ever caught fish they have orange pinchers sticking out of their throat or anything like that, the green pumpkin orange color is awesome for that. That bright orange, especially when you have dirty water and they're feeding on crawfish, that thing stands out awesome and catches a ton of fish. It's got the green pumpkin back, orange belly. If they are on craws, especially, anytime you're using like the fire craw jackhammers in the spring, red baits, if you throw this as a finesse bait to follow those up, you will catch a ton of fish on this color right here. And my 2 wild cards for fishing with the Ned Rig. My favorite one when they're actually fishing on crawfish specifically is the Z-Man Craw. These little pinchers float up off the bottom and look different than the standard Ned Rig. When everyone's throwing that TRD, if you throw this and it has a little bit different look to it when you know the fish are feeding on crawfish, this thing will catch a ton of fish. And my favorite for winter bass fishing, when I know the fish are feeding on small minnows or other bait fish like bluegills and stuff like that down on the bottom, when there's not a lot of crawfish out because they're in hibernation, is going to be a 2.8 Kitech. This one does not float, but the key with this one is I'll throw it out there, let it sink to the bottom, and slowly hop it along the bottom, just like a little bait fish kind of swimming within 6 inches of the bottom. And every once in a while just kill it and let it sit down there. And if you want, you can even throw it out there, let it sink all the way down to the bottom, and just reel it in really slowly like a finesse swim bait. It's almost a 2-in-1 bait approach, and it works awesome. The electric shad color works amazing. Bluegill flash, anything like that that imitates those small minnows and bluegills. And if the water gets a little bit dirty, you can go to the pearl white color, and it'll catch you a lot of fish as well. This is one not a lot of people throw, but it catches a lot of fish. So hopefully this video helped you learn how to catch more fish on a Ned Rig. If you specifically fish rivers and want to learn how to fish a Ned Rig in rivers, go ahead and click this video right here. We did an awesome video talking about catching some big smallmouth on these Ned Rigs like this. And if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like down below and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any more of my fishing tips coming up.